A quick warning. This episode contains descriptions of violence and death. We advise listener discretion. I'm Jeffrey Toobin, and this is Homegrown. I am standing exactly where McVeigh parked his truck on April 19th, 1995. This is exactly where he set off the bomb. Today, behind me, is a reflecting pool where 5th Street used to be. And in front of me is probably one of the most recognizable places in all of Oklahoma, if not the whole country, which is the chairs. It's the memorial to the 168 people who died. The chairs have frosted glass bases with the names, and it's an incredibly serene scene, but your eye is immediately drawn to the small chairs. There are 19 small chairs because there were 19 children killed in the bombing. The chairs are arranged by the floor where the person was when the bomb went off, and you see most of the small chairs are in the second row because the second floor is where the daycare center was. And it's just incredibly haunting. You know, I've covered a lot of murder cases, and every murder case you have just a family that has been, damaged if not destroyed, and then you look at all these chairs and every single one is a murder victim, and every single one had a family that was shattered by this event. So as peaceful as this memorial is, it does give you a sense of the absolutely enormous scale of what McVeigh did here on April 19th. Episode 5, The Oklahoma Standard.
The last thing that my daughter said to me is, "I'll see you tomorrow, Mom. I love you, and good night." And the last thing I said to my daughter is, "I love you. I'll see you tomorrow."
Well, for me, April 19th in 1995 started like most days. I get up around 5 and go work out. So I went to my usual parking place across the street from the Murrah building and went in the Y and worked out for 45 minutes.
Breakfast rush was between 7 and 8. We had people that come in from credit union, the ATF, the Army. They buy coffee, they bought snacks, breakfast.
Got up in the morning, went to a friend's house and just had a quick conversation. And I was getting ready to leave, and he said, "Hey, Mark, would you like to have a cup of coffee?" And I said, "No." And then I realized, hey, it might not be a bad idea. Well, I always tell people, never show up for work on time, and always drink a cup of coffee in the morning because it might save your life. Yeah.
The Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum has an extensive archive of hundreds of oral histories. Family members of victims, survivors, investigators, and first responders. Much of the interview tape in this episode comes from that extraordinary collection. And just to give you another heads up, we will be returning to the story of Timothy McVeigh and the investigation, but the first part of this episode focuses on the horror of the bombing itself. The Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building stood at 200 Northwest 5th Street. 9 floors of offices for various government agencies sat behind a front wall completely covered in black glass.
Well, we were centrally located there in the middle of the building.
Raymond Washburn owned and operated a snack bar in the heart of the Murrah Building on the 4th floor.
That time of morning, everybody was, in a cheerful bunch and in a good mood. Everybody was laughing and carrying on.
Raymond was a member of the Yuchi tribe. The Uchis are Native Americans who were relocated to Oklahoma in the 1800s. As a child, Raymond went completely blind.
I can picture in my mind the layout of that Murrah building, just how you could walk in there.
Raymond worked inside the Murrah building for 32 years, and he knew his regular customers and their orders by their voices.
I created a good customer relationship there, and I tried to please my customers about what they wanted. If they wanted a certain item in the snack bar, I got it for them, or at least I tried.
To bring you up to speed on what has happened today, just after 9 o'clock Central Time in Oklahoma City, an explosive device, which is being described by officials as a car bomb, went off in front of the federal building in downtown Oklahoma, shearing the...
When the explosion happened, Raymond was standing behind his counter.
I didn't hear anything. Next thing I knew, I had this fear of couldn't get enough air. All the oxygen, all the air was taken away. I at first thought I was having a heart attack. I started feeling debris falling on me from the front, from the back, to the side. I noticed that there wasn't any counter. Usually I'll kind of lean on it. It was gone.
The blast registered 6.0 on the Richter scale. It could be felt 55 miles away.
On the morning of April the 19th, I had just stepped out of the shower and I heard this huge explosion. And I was concerned that there might have been a rupture of a gas line where they were building condominiums down the street.
Marcia Kite was home that morning. Her daughter, Frankie Merrill, worked at the Murrah building. Frankie asked her mom the day before if she could watch her daughter, Morgan. If not, Morgan could go to the America's Kids Daycare Center. But Marcia agreed, and her granddaughter was with her that day.
So I threw on my robe and ran outside, and I saw a cloud of black smoke coming from what seemed the proximity of where my daughter worked. So I ran back into the house, and I turned on the television, and immediately I saw the Murrah Federal building in ruin.
The debris had pushed me down to the floor, and I managed to lift it up for about 3-4 inches to get my feet out. I didn't hear people holler until I stood up. I could hear voices.
4 customers and an employee were in Raymond's snack bar when the blast happened.
I had a cane that I stuck in the corner. I knew where we were, and there wasn't no cane or there wasn't no wall. And I couldn't stop and wait because I had these people behind me.
The others formed a line behind Raymond, knowing that, as a blind man, he knew the layout of the building better than anyone.
You know, I had the advantage over him because not being able to see, I felt like that this is one time that, you know, you want to try to help somebody as much as you can.
With Raymond taking the lead, the group slowly headed toward the southwest stairway.
Well, there was glass, there was debris. I led the way, and that's how we got out.
Finally, they got out of the building. Raymond had helped rescue 5 people.
Well, you could hear sirens, people talking, people asking questions, what happened, people coming up and saying, we're from the fire department, we're from the police department, are you hurt?
After my workout, I returned home and showered and went to work. I'm an orthopedic surgeon at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center.
Dr. Andy Sullivan was in his office when he heard the explosion. He ran over to the university hospital nearby and took an elevator to the roof.
By the time I got to the top floor, they opened the roof, and we actually were able to walk out on the roof of the hospital and have an unimpeded view of downtown. And by that time, of course, the initial explosion caused a big concrete-type cloud. It was very obvious to me that there'd been a major disaster downtown.
The hospital immediately initiated its disaster plan. They discharged as many patients as they could to prepare for the incoming victims of the bombing.
So there was a big wave of patients that went on for probably an hour or so. And then we kind of reached a lull, and things quieted down. And became obvious that for a while anyway, we weren't going to be receiving any patients. So I had gone back to my clinic and was watching the news coverage on television, and they made an announcement that they needed some medical people at the bomb site.
Dr. Sullivan hopped into a state police car and he was driven downtown.
That was when I kind of entered into a surreal world. I got to the neighborhood that I drive in every day, and it was like you could have been in, a bombing in Iran or Vietnam or who knows where that you'd seen on television. People were streaming down the street. Glass was strewn everywhere.
The bomb damaged 324 buildings in a 50-block area of downtown Oklahoma City.
I think that was when it really began to dawn on me, or to awaken in me a little bit of the danger that we were walking into.
Because the bombing happened downtown, there were several major hospitals within just a couple miles. And because it happened at a time of day when most of the doctors were making rounds, it allowed the medical response to be immediate. Scores of Oklahomans from all walks of life ran toward the building, not away from it, to help in any way they could. Because of the location of the daycare center on the second floor, some of the first victims to be found were the youngest. The firefighters on the scene brought out so many children that they began to line up their small bodies on the sidewalk. A priest arrived on the scene and began blessing the dead. People started calling the improvised morgue the church.
You could look into the building and see the vast hole where it had essentially caved into 5th Street, and see mostly just rubble and shambles, but some bodies, some people trapped.
Dr. Sullivan had heard that they had found a victim who couldn't be pulled out because this person's leg was trapped under the rubble. He grabbed a sterilized amputation set and a tourniquet. Dr. Sullivan emptied his pockets of everything but his driver's license in case his own body needed to be identified later, and he went inside.
You were in a building that now had bare wires, bare plumbing. You were walking in rubble and water and stepping over electrical wires and things that were in the way. The light was very poor, and there was just kind of a impermeable dust. It was just dusty, like fog almost.
Finally, Dr. Sullivan made it to the woman who was trapped.
I didn't know her name that day. Probably didn't know her name to the next day, but her name was Dana Bradley.
That morning, Dana Bradley had arrived at the Social Security Administration on the first floor to get her 3-month-old baby boy a Social Security card. Bradley was just 20 years old, and she was unfamiliar with all the bureaucracy, so she brought along her mother, her 3-year-old daughter, and her sister, Felicia. When Dr. Sullivan reached Bradley, he saw that her leg was trapped underneath a concrete beam.
She looked very much like someone with a Halloween costume. It was like white powder, and her face was totally covered with this concrete dust. After talking to her and explaining to her that we didn't think that we could get her out, I don't think at that early time told her that we were going to have to amputate her leg. But we began making preparations to do that.
As Dr. Sullivan was preparing to amputate, a call came over the radio. Authorities suspected that they had found a second bomb. Everyone was ordered to evacuate immediately.
Get him back! Get him back!
We scrambled out of the space, left Dana there, screaming not to desert her, which was very difficult to leave her, but I felt we really didn't have any choice.
First responders ran away from the Murrah building. Dr. Sullivan waited in what was left of the lobby. 45 excruciating minutes later, it was discovered that the second bomb was a false alarm, and rescuers re-entered the building. Dr. Sullivan told Bradley that they needed to do a through-the-knee amputation.
And her initial response was that we couldn't do this. And I said that really we had no choice. And she then did consent to the amputation.
Sullivan had to lie on top of Bradley to access her knee. He improvised a tourniquet, tightened it, and injected her with a drug called Versed, which operated as an imperfect anesthetic.
At this point, it really became a little bit difficult for me. I mean, I've done amputations, I've done plenty of amputations. I've certainly never done one under these circumstances. I'm going to go in there and do this, and this lady's going to die, and it's going to be my fault because she bleeds to death in this building because of something I did.
Sullivan took a deep breath, said a prayer, and began cutting with the scalpel.
She was kicking and screaming, and as anyone would be when you're awake and you're having your leg amputated.
Several times, he thought the amputation was completed, only to realize that the leg was still attached when they tried to move Bradley out. Dr. Sullivan's scalpels and blades were now dull.
And the only thing I had left was a pocket knife in my rear pocket. And it was fairly new, it was sharp, and it was probably a godsend because with that I was able to cut through the remaining muscles that were in front of the knee, which was what was preventing me from taking the leg off.
Firefighters removed Bradley from the rubble. Bradley's 2 children and her mother died that day. Dana Bradley and her sister Felicia, who also suffered terrible injuries, both survived. It's estimated that there were about 600 people inside the Murrah building's 9 floors on April 19th. Of these, 163 were killed, including 15 of the 21 children in the daycare center. 4 people died nearby, 3 in office buildings across the street and 1 in a parking lot. All 3 teachers in the daycare, as well as all the infants in the cribs, were killed.
Seeing the face of the building and knowing where my daughter worked, the first thought that entered my mind when I saw the building that my daughter was dead.
Despite what she saw, Marcia Kite searched for her daughter Frankie throughout that day. She had tried to get closer to the Murrah building, but Marcia was sent with other families to the nearby St. Anthony's Hospital.
What they were doing was taking what appeared to be large pieces of butcher paper and writing down the person's name and where they had been taken for treatment. And so we were constantly searching for Frankie's name, and we were calling the hospitals, trying to locate her. Later that day, we were sent over to First Christian Church, and I'll never forget walking into that room. They said, there will be counselors here to talk to you. And there were men in black coats, and they had the Funeral Directors Association. And they called us to the table, and they started inquiring about if we had any knowledge of what she might have been wearing and ways to identify her. I remember becoming hysterical because I felt like I was being interviewed by vultures vying for the carnage. That's how it made me feel.
Marcia was then sent to St. Luke's, where the American Red Cross had set up.
And at that time, they were letting journalists and cameramen into the church. I was looking across the room, and here was a cameraman trying to shoot me when I was in very bad shape. And all I remember is running out of the church and my son pulling me to the ground. That's when they called someone from triage over to medicate me, and they said it was probably best that I go home and wait to be notified. All I remember after that is wondering how in the world I was going to tell a 2-year-old little girl that her mother wasn't coming back.
Official confirmation of her daughter's death didn't come for another 5 days. According to the state of Oklahoma, as a result of the bombing, 30 children were orphaned. and 219 lost one parent. The state estimated that 360,000 Oklahomans, about 10% of the population of the entire state, knew someone personally who worked in the Murrah building. On the morning of April 19th, virtually the entire power structure of the state was gathered at the Myriad Convention Center, about 5 blocks from the Murrah building. At the annual Oklahoma City prayer breakfast, 1,200 guests socialized and ate biscuits and gravy until their pagers started going off. Very quickly, those leaders, as well as thousands of Oklahomans acting on their own, began one of the largest volunteer efforts in American history. They gave blood, they comforted victims' families, they hosted responders from around the world, they donated money and time. Eventually, the local response to the bombing became known as the Oklahoma Standard. It became a countrywide model for compassionate response to tragedy.
I also want to thank the people of Oklahoma City, for their outpouring of courage and commitment and compassion for those who have been injured.
That same day, Oklahoma Governor Frank Keating addressed the media.
It really is remarkable, the lines that have appeared in front of the Red Cross and in front of hospitals to give blood. We intend to honor the dead and honor the living by finding out who did this and never permitting this conduct to recur.
The immediate focus after the bombing was on the rescue operation, but an investigation of the crime itself began at almost the same time. In Oklahoma City, no eyewitness had come forward to say that they had actually seen the person who set off the bomb. And the man who did it was getting away.
Well, on the morning of April 19th, 1995, that was another day shift for me that day. I went to work at 7 a.m. and began another what I thought was a routine day shift in Noble County.
The lawmen of the Oklahoma Highway Patrol are called troopers. They wear big round hats. The vibe is more Western sheriff than city cop, and so it was with Charlie Hanger. Hanger is interviewed here in an Oklahoma City Memorial oral history.
At that time, I was assigned to a large area, all of Noble County plus the interstate, and chose to work the secondary roads that day.
When the bombing happened on the morning of April 19th, Hanger was about 60 miles north of the city. The OHP called out a 10653, a major statewide emergency.
Well, I knew something big was up. I mean, you could tell they were just sending unit after unit after unit downtown.
Hanger received orders to report to the command post that had just been established near the bomb site in Oklahoma City.
And so I get my unit lights and siren and started south on the interstate. Didn't get a half a mile. And I get another radio call telling me to disregard that assignment and remain on routine patrol in my area.
What's going through my mind is I had paced this off through town a prior time. I believe it was the trip with me and Terry. We had gotten out, walked around, and timed it. In my mind, I'm thinking, it didn't go off yet. Something is wrong.
When the bomb went off, Timothy McVeigh was in the alleyway, close to where he had stashed his Mercury. He was nicked in the leg by a brick that flew off a nearby building from the blast. Then McVeigh took out his earplugs.
Alarms were going off everywhere. Car alarms, store alarms, etc. The whole town is just a bunch of alarms, sirens.
McVeigh did a quick walk around the Mercury and saw that it was undamaged. He got in, turned the key, and nothing. Wouldn't start. He waited 30 seconds and tried again. Still nothing. He had driven the Road Warrior for so long that he didn't remember how old junkers worked. He paused and figured that he needed to get fuel to the carburetor. McVeigh pumped the gas pedal 5 times.
Finally, it catches. I let it warm up for maybe 30 seconds, and I put it in drive. Beggars couldn't be choosers when I got this car.
When McVeigh emerged from the alley, the downtown streets were swarming with emergency vehicles. He wanted to know about the extent of the damage, but he had no working radio in the car. So he just kept his eyes open, even looking above to see if a helicopter was following him. McVeigh finally made it to I-35 heading north. Once he got on the highway, McVeigh thought about stopping at a rest area, but he decided to press on. His destination was in another state, the storage facility in Harrington, Kansas.
If I get that far, I'm pretty much free and clear, and I can sit back and think. Right now, I have to keep on the move.
I had been told there was a possible motorist assist just a short distance from where I was at, so I responded to that location and began helping these two ladies that were broke down in a van.
After a tow truck arrived, State Trooper Charlie Hanger got back on I-35. Then he remembered that he had to finish a report on an accident that happened over the weekend. Hanger floored the gas on his cruiser, and his speedometer hit about 100 miles an hour.
I looked in my rear view and saw the state trooper car flying up to me in the passing lane without his lights on. Just flying.
So I'm speeding up the interstate, and I come upon this vehicle that doesn't have a tag on the rear bumper.
Hanger thought, did I just see a car without a license plate?
You know, when I was a brand new trooper, I had an older trooper tell me something that turned out to be very prophetic. He told me, he said, if you'll take care of the small things, the big things will come to you. And so I made a habit of taking care of the little things.
Hanger slowed down and pulled his car to about even with McVeigh's.
He looks at me. I look back over at him. I had my hat off at this time, knowing that my haircut lends itself to a clean-cut appearance, and 9 times out of 10, that will get the respect. They will think I'm law enforcement or some type of security guard, etc. with this haircut.
The haircut didn't work. Hanger got behind McVeigh and turned on his lights and siren. McVeigh pulled over. Hanger yelled for the driver to step out of his vehicle.
The door opens. He doesn't get out like a normal violator. He turns around and sits on the edge of the seat, looking to the west, not looking toward me. And I wonder, what's this guy doing? And I yell again, driver, get out of the vehicle. And he stands up, begins walking toward me. I see his hands are empty. I feel there's no threat, so I step and meet him between the two cars. Well, I tell him, the reason I've stopped you is that you don't have a tag on the rear bumper. He immediately looks to the rear bumper and quickly looks back at me and responds, oh, I knew I didn't have a tag. I recently bought this car and just haven't had time to get one.
Hanger asked for the car's bill of sale and registration. McVeigh said that the seller was still filling out the paperwork.
So I'm beginning to think stolen car. Even though it's on a junky old car, I'm thinking this guy probably stole this car. I said, do you have a driver's license? He said, yes.
McVeigh reached into his pocket for his driver's license, and his jacket tightened up.
And I see a bulge under his left arm that appeared to be a weapon. So he retrieves his billfold, takes his license out, hands it to me. It's a Michigan license.
The name Timothy James McVeigh meant nothing to Hanger. McVeigh wasn't yet connected to the bombing. The state trooper was more concerned about that gun.
And I tell him, I said, take both hands, slowly unzip that jacket, and slowly pull that back. I want to look under it. He unzips the jacket. He just starts back with opening it up, and he says, I have a weapon. At that time, I just reached forward and I grabbed the bulge on the outside of his jacket, and I'm spinning him around, saying, get your hands up, turn around. And I drew my weapon and stuck it to the back of his head and instructed him to walk to the trunk of his car. He's complying, does everything I ask him to do, except when we're about halfway to the trunk of his car, he says, my weapon is loaded. And I thought he was trying to intimidate me by saying that. And so I nudged him with the barrel of my weapon to the back of his head. I said, so is mine.
So is mine, a line that belongs in the Badass Hall of Fame. Hanger reached into McVeigh's holster, removed the handgun, and tossed it on the grass. He frisked McVeigh and found a fully loaded ammunition magazine and a knife on his belt. Hanger threw those things on the side too. He then placed McVeigh in handcuffs, told him he was under arrest for carrying a weapon without a permit, and read him his Miranda rights. Then Hanger put McVeigh in his cruiser and ran some checks. Everything came back clean. This was the first time that McVeigh had ever been arrested. There is a revealing postscript to this moment. Thanks to Oklahoma's recently loosened gun laws, if Hanger had stopped McVeigh under today's circumstances, all he could have done was give him a ticket for not having a license plate. And McVeigh would have been on his way to Kansas. It was about a half-hour drive to the Noble County Courthouse in the town of Perry, and McVeigh made small talk with Hanger.
He was very compliant continually. I mean, he was never aggressive toward me. He was always respectful. When I addressed him or he addressed me, it was yes, sir, and that type of thing. He didn't show any emotion at all. It was just blank.
Hanger took McVeigh to the 4th floor lockup in the courthouse, where he was fingerprinted, processed, and given an orange jumpsuit. In the jail, everyone was talking about the news on TV.
The jailer and I are talking about how many people must have been killed and injured. And McVeigh never makes any statements. I see him looking up at the TV occasionally, looking back down, but he never asked what was going on. He never made any comments. Now, the car he was in did not have a radio. It was just a hole in the dash where a radio should have been. So I'm thinking at that time, this guy doesn't even know what's going on here in our state.
Now this whole time, the whole 2 days in the cell, they have the radio on the intercom system, and it's just constant updates on the bombing. So I'm listening for the progress of the investigation, and I don't want it to be obvious I'm listening. There's rumors they have recovered an axle. They think it's Middle Easterners at first and all this, and I'm listening to the progress.
The jail staff later recalled that the only odd thing about the new prisoner's behavior was that he didn't say a single word about the bombing.
I mean, to think that he had just killed 168 people and injured hundreds others, and not be able to see something in somebody's eyes after that was scary, looking at it in hindsight. And this guy showed no emotion at all. And he was friendly and polite, and but no emotions.
McVeigh was in jail on a simple misdemeanor. A judge would set bail probably the next day. Then he'd be free to go. Within an hour of the bombing, FBI investigators had a promising lead. Agents were examining a truck axle that was found in front of an apartment building called the Regency.
I'm standing in front of the Regency when the bomb went off. An enormous hunk of steel came flying through the air and nearly demolished a car that was parked right where I'm standing. It's just amazing to think of the power of 4,000 pounds of fertilizer in a bomb that could send a piece of steel weighing probably a couple hundred pounds 100 yards in a parabola through the air to land right in front of me. People noticed, even at the time, that that was different from all the other rubble. People thought, correctly, that this could be part of the truck that held the bomb.
Everybody knew what a key piece of evidence this was.
Bob Ricks is a former FBI agent who helped lead the bombing investigation. He's interviewed here by the Oklahoma City National Memorial.
And I made some trite comment like, well, guard that with your lives because this could be the solution to the case we're looking for.
There on the truck axle, within hours of the bombing, the FBI found a hidden vehicle identification number. That allowed them to find where the truck had been rented.
So immediately, that's where our focus from the FBI's investigative side really started to kick in. It was rented to an Elliott's Body Shop in Junction City, Kansas. We pull up the rental application. It was rented under the name of a gentleman by the name of Robert Bob Kling. date of birth of April 19th.
Things happened so fast in that investigation, and they had witnesses lined up waiting for me to go to work on it.
Raymond Rozicki was a visual information specialist for the FBI. He was a sketch artist. On the night of April 19th, Rozicki arrived at Fort Riley in Kansas, where the FBI had set up a temporary headquarters. At around midnight, a mechanic at Elliott's body shop named Tom Kessinger was there waiting for Rozicki. He said he remembered what this Robert Kling looked like.
He was like a fly on the wall. He was watching from a distance, watching an interaction. So his vantage point was really good. He was looking very carefully at that person for whatever reason.
Rozicki had brought a series of books with pictures of faces to help build a sketch. He was also told by his superiors to bring his Middle East book with Arab-looking faces because of the early assumption that the bombing was an act of Islamic terrorism.
I introduced him to the tools that I was using, which included a face catalog, giving him some images to help him pick and say, this, his ears look like this, his nose look like this. And I could then flip back and forth and do a Mr. Potato Head kind of drawing, put that together according to the image that he had in his head.
But Kessinger said that he remembered that this Robert Kling was not alone. He was with another guy when he rented the truck.
He said, I can give you images of two people. First, I said, well, tell me the one that you have the strongest feelings about. What he proceeded to describe was a very unremarkable, sort of a generic white guy, military kind of crew cut.
This was not what Raymond or the FBI was anticipating.
I was not expecting this to be something that an American would do inside this country. I just was not expecting it. Our focus was not in that direction in the office. We were thinking in terms of other types of terrorist activities. And this sort of came out of the blue. It was a shocker, obviously a shocker to everybody.
Then they moved to the second person that Kessinger said he saw.
We didn't spend as long on that drawing. So he was a fuller-faced, tanned, darker-skinned male.
They worked together until dawn on Thursday, April 20th, until Kessinger was happy with what Rozicki had produced. For the sake of simplicity, they called the two sketches John Doe Number 1 and John Doe Number 2.
As rescue efforts continue in Oklahoma City, a worldwide manhunt is now on for the suspects in that bombing.
Just hours after the sketches were completed, the images were released to the public. They resulted in a torrent of false leads.
On Thursday, the FBI released sketches of two men it says were, quote, associated with the truck that was used in the bombing.
A medium-built man with a light brown crew cut and a companion with a tattoo on his left arm.
While the news was swirling with speculation, FBI agents fanned out from Elliott's body shop, asking local businesses if they remembered someone with a Ryder truck. Leah McGowan at the Dreamland sure did, and she pulled out her motel register showing who stayed in room 25 just a few days earlier.
And the gentleman there had registered under the name of Timothy McVeigh.
FBI agent Bob Ricks again.
At this time, we had no idea who Timothy McVeigh was. We had no idea if this Timothy McVeigh had anything to do with the bombing. We did not even know that. All we knew at this time was that we had a Timothy McVeigh that had been there during the period of time when the truck was rented, and that he had other connections that could possibly be tied in. But we had a lot to do to tie that in.
When the agent showed McGowan the sketch of John Doe Number 1, she said that sure looked like this McVeigh guy. Prosecutor in the McVeigh trial, Scott Mendeloff.
One of the things they were able to do once they found out that McVeigh had rented the room and was there is to get the phone records for the room and the phone calls that he had made.
After seeing the call to the Hunan Palace, FBI agents headed over to the Chinese restaurant to see if they still had a receipt for the order.
And they did. And the receipt indicated the purchase of Mugu Gai Pan at Dreamland Motel at the same room that McVeigh was at. But McVeigh made a mistake, which was an important mistake for us. He used his fake name, Robert Kling, as the person that was ordering the food. So now he has connected himself directly to Robert Kling.
So this is the key clue: the smoking Moo Goo Gai pan. The food order proved that Robert Kling and Timothy McVeigh were the same person, and he rented the Ryder truck with the axle that was found at the bombing.
This was the first piece of really, really important corroborating information. We ended up developing a lot more, but this piece was really essential.
But they still had no idea where this guy was. The FBI ran McVeigh's name through a national database of people with criminal records. It turned up nothing. On Friday morning in Washington, D.C., agents started a more labor-intensive offline paper search for McVeigh's name. That search revealed that on the morning of the bombing, someone from the Oklahoma Highway Patrol had run a background check on the name Timothy James McVeigh.
And so Friday morning, I'm in the command post. Had been there for 24 hours about by now.
ATF Special Agent Mark Mahalik was working in a conference room near the Murrah building with a couple of dozen other investigators when he was handed the name Timothy McVeigh.
And somebody said, "Hey, Mahalik, do you mind running this lead down?" I said, "Sure, let me see where it goes."
Through an old state trooper friend, Mahalik found out that a trooper named Charlie Hanger had arrested a guy with that name, and that Hanger remembered putting him in the jail in Perry, Oklahoma. So Mahalik called the Noble County Courthouse in Perry and asked to speak with the sheriff there.
Guy gets on the phone and says, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yes, is this Sheriff Cook?" He said, "Yeah, but you can call me Sheriff Cook today because let me tell you, I'm having a day." He said, "I've got people off," and he launches into this story about what a rough day he's having because there's some administrative issues and budget issues or whatever. And I said, "Well, Sheriff, here's my deal." I said, "Oklahoma Highway Patrol arrested an old boy on the morning of the bombing, and they said they stuck him in your jail. Can you check on that?" He said, "Sure, Mark." So I hear this shouting across the room, and I'm sure some secretaries and staff assistants talking.
By now, the other investigators in the room with Mahalik were sensing that something important was happening. They crowded around him on the phone.
And so I'm waiting, and Jerry come back and says, "Yeah, Mark, we got him. We got the guy in here. It's a guy that Charlie brought in." I said, "Okay, Sheriff, can you give me his name?" And I'll never forget. He goes, "Yeah, his name's Timothy James McVeigh." And I yelled, "We got him. We've got him."
The Oklahoma City conference room erupted with cheers. A lot of hard work and a fair amount of luck had paid off. When the noise died down, Mahalik asked the sheriff if he knew exactly where McVeigh was. The sheriff said that at that very moment, McVeigh was being taken to his arraignment on the gun charge. He'd be released soon after.
I said, "Well, Sheriff, do me a favor. If you don't mind, spin that old boy around and put him back in your hotel. There's going to be some federal boys come see you." And he said, "Okay. Is this something, Mark?" "Yeah, Jerry, it is." And so I hung up, and it was a memorable moment.
So they sent me to get him, and I went to the airport and jumped in one of the FBI helicopters and without any doors on it.
Danny Colson was one of the federal boys sent by the FBI to Perry. He was responsible for making the arrest, but he had no idea what was coming.
Now, remember, I don't know if this is a conspiracy. I don't know if there's 100 people involved. Is somebody going to try to kill him or break him out of jail?
The helicopter landed, and a local cop picked up Colson to take him to the Noble County Courthouse.
And when I got out of the car, a gentleman came up to me, an elderly gentleman, and he said, are you with the FBI? And I said, "I am." He said, "Well, if you have trouble with the evidence, just put that boy out the back gate and we'll handle it for you."
By this point, the word had gotten out that a suspect in the bombing was being held at the courthouse. Hundreds of people suddenly gathered outside, baying for blood.
I was thinking, we're going to have a riot? Are they going to break him out? Or
Colson went inside, and the prisoner was brought to the agents.
The agents talked to McVeigh, and they said, "You know why we're here?" And he said, "It's about the thing in Oklahoma City," that's good for us. And then they asked him, "You want to talk?" He said, "No." So he invoked. So he made a decision to get him out of there.
But the judge on McVeigh's weapon charge still wanted to proceed with the arraignment. So McVeigh was now restrained in a leather belly strap with handcuffs and chains attached and brought to the courtroom.
I'm getting a call about every 5 minutes from the director or somebody in a high position in the government said, "Danny, get him out, get him out." And I kept thinking, leave me alone, I will.
The judge set McVeigh's bail at $5,000, but that was meaningless because the feds were now going to hold him on far more serious charges. Colson was worried about the fury of the crowd outside. He wanted McVeigh surrounded by agents at all times, but they didn't have a vehicle big enough to hold everyone. So Colson decided to borrow a minivan that belonged to the wife of Sheriff Cook. Outside, the soccer mom vehicle pulled up for the man who would soon become the most notorious criminal suspect in the United States. It was only about 20 steps from the courthouse to the van, but this became an iconic moment in the story of the Oklahoma City bombing. Colson wanted a fast pace, so in the endless replays on TV, McVeigh's journey was usually shown in slow motion, which always adds a sinister edge. What people remember best about the footage was McVeigh's orange jumpsuit, his crew cut, and especially his expression. He looked fierce, determined, unapologetic, which was exactly what he was. The van finally made it to the airstrip with the FBI helicopter. Agent Colson was right next to McVeigh.
And before he got out of the van, I set him back down. I said, "You behave. You act like a gentleman or you get hurt." And he was very deferential. "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. No, sir."
They put McVeigh in the helicopter, and they still weren't taking any chances.
And we flew all the way to the Air Force Base at about 6 feet off the ground, which is kind of exciting. Because if to evade a missile, you don't fly high, you fly low. And they can't track you if you're really low. So we're jumping over fences at 130 knots, and he never showed one bit of emotion, just looked straight ahead.
The feds had their man in custody. Now the victims' families, the state of Oklahoma, and the entire country wanted to see him brought to justice. The pressure would be on the government to sift through the mountain of evidence and build an airtight case against McVeigh. Even the smallest slip-up could have dire consequences for the prosecution. The Justice Department needed the right man for the job, so they turned to a rising star, a lawyer named Merrick Garland.
So you want to be sure that every I was dotted and every T was crossed.
Next time on Homegrown, the federal government responds.
We want to be sure we had done everything we could possibly do to find every person who was involved.
The United States will not tolerate it, and I will not allow the people of this country to be intimidated by evil cowards.
Homegrown Oklahoma City is a USG audio podcast produced by Western Sound in association with Esmail Corp. It's reported, written, and hosted by me, Jeffrey Toobin. Executive producers are Josh Block at USG Audio, Sam Esmail and Chad Hamilton at Esmail Corp, and Western Sound's Ben Adair and Colin McNulty, who is also the editor. Production support from Josh Lalongi at USG Audio. The producer and sound designer is Tyler Hill. The associate producer is Stella Hardman. The producer from Esmail Corp is Sarah Maddy. Original theme and engineering by Alex McGinnis. Fact-checking by Nicole McNulty and Savannah Wright. Special thanks to Betsy Shepard and Dan Leone. Passages of Timothy McVeigh are read by Chris Cowan. Our gratitude also to the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum and the Briscoe Center at the University of Texas. For more information on this podcast and other podcasts by USG Audio, go to our website, usgaudio.com. And to learn even more, read my book, Homegrown, Timothy McVeigh and the Rise of Right-Wing Extremism.